One of the most important moments in the ongoing war over big tech censorship was the battle of Patreon. At a certain point, a couple of years ago, I believe it was maybe just actually around a year ago, Patreon banned several moderately high-profile individuals. They did it for hate speech violations or other terms violations. This caused a lot of problems for a lot of people. I ended up losing a decent amount of subscribers because people who were giving to me on Patreon said, sorry, man, I use this to give to multiple people, and if they're going to censor people I like, I'm leaving. So I ended up actually losing paying subscribers who helped support my work. Very, very frustrating. Ultimately, I decided I will leave Patreon and use other services. I still maintain a skeleton version of my Patreon. I don't post to it, but I just left it up. Some people still wanted to use it, and I'm just not going to update it because I think Patreon is a terrible company. But we have a major, major breaking news update. Patreon has just lost a very serious legal claim, which could result in the end of their company as it pertains to the great battle of Patreon. You see, Owen Benjamin is a comedian. Apparently, he's offensive. I don't know a whole lot about the guy, to be completely honest, but he got booted off for hate speech. He then instructed his fans to sue Patreon. The Daily Dot wrote this story back on July 6th. Alt-right comedian asked his fans to sue Patreon. It backfired. It actually didn't. The update here from Mike Cernovich is, update, Patreon lost. The judge applied well-established law and denied Patreon's motion cited against them in their lawsuit against Owen Benjamin's fans. Patreon will now be forced to arbitrate 100 plus claims and pay upfront fees of up to $10,000 per arbitration. Cernovich then said, Sargon of Akkad could end Patreon if he and his followers file actions similar to the one Owen Benjamin's fans did. That's it. That would be the end of Patreon. And Will Chamberlain, also a lawyer, mind you, Will and Cernovich are lawyers. Will said Lauren Southern and Milo too. And there it is. I defer to the experts. You see, Mike Cernovich makes a really important point. He said, these social justice journalists don't know anything about law, and they often try to write about law, and they do a really bad job. So the Daily Dot writes that it backfires on Owen Benjamin when he tried to get his fans to sue Patreon. Let me break this down for you, but let me first start by saying, if you were on Patreon and you closed your account before the end of the year, I'm not a lawyer. Here's my general understanding. Anybody who had an account before January 1st, 2020, I think it's 2020. Actually, I believe they mentioned it right here in this article. I'm just trying to make sure I get this absolutely correct. Here we go. Anybody who closed their account, arguably not even, it doesn't even matter, but let me just say it. If you closed your account before January 1st because of the censorship, you should be able to engage in much the same way Owen Benjamin's fans did, and it would filing an arbitration claim. This would result in Patreon being forced to front money to cover the costs of arbitration. What Mike Cernovich is saying is that not whether you agree with the views of Owen Benjamin or his comedy or anything like that, if people who have been banned from Patreon tell their fans to file arbitration claims, Patreon will not be able to handle an influx of thousands of people. It would cost them tens of millions of dollars, potentially more. Could be, as Cernovich said, the end. The general idea is that in Patreon's terms of service, they said, you must take it to arbitration instead of suing us. They changed the terms on January 1st of this year. What happened was Owen Benjamin's fans announced let me read this article for you and I'll correct the mistakes. They say, Owen Benjamin has managed to get 72 of his fans sued by Patreon. Last October, Patreon banned Benjamin, an alt-right commentator and self-styled comedian, for violating its policies against hate speech. Patreon's ban came in the midst of a flurry of other platforms kicking him off as well. They say, according to court documents, Benjamin subsequently filed a $2.2 million claim against Patreon for banning him and then later upped it to $3.5 million. He also got 100 of his fans to file separate, identical claims against Patreon for kicking him off the platform, notably for tortious interference, arguing that Owen Benjamin has a contract with the user. Patreon, by banning him, severed this contract, interfering in his arrangement with these users. And it's a very interesting argument. They may not have a claim, but it's interesting because if I get banned from a platform, but I have an agreement with someone else and I'm operating under certain terms, then they're essentially causing the third party harm. They say, now Patreon is suing 72 of his fans. This lawsuit is about keeping hate speech off of Patreon, the company said. Let me stop you right there. What Patreon, like all of these other corporations, is doing is using the narrative to defend their unfair business practices. Whenever someone tries to go to a different platform, I'm not going to get into it because we're dealing with legal matters and I don't want to get sued, but I'll just say I believe what they're doing is unfair and they manipulate the narrative by claiming we're fighting against hate speech. When Sargon of Akkad got banned, it had nothing to do with their hate speech policy. It was Sargon like facetiously using a word or ironically using a word on a separate live stream somewhere else from a long time before they decided to ban him. So it seems arbitrary. But anyway, let's read. They say, unlike the prior claims, the suit against Benjamin's fans is filed in California state court. Patreon's previous terms of service require claims to be submitted to arbitration, like Benjamin's $3.5 million. An update to its terms of service that went into effect on January 1st both prohibits users from filing claims based on the platform kicking off someone else and requires any who do so to pay the company's attorney's fees and costs. The only problem? Those were new terms. So a new lawyer stepped up to represent Owen Benjamin's fans. I watched this court proceeding play out. Cernovich tweeted about it. That's what he's updating on a couple of weeks ago. He basically said, This argument, the lawyer basically said, if you enter into a contract with someone under specific terms, and then when they announce they plan to take you to arbitration, you immediately rush up and say, wait, we've changed our terms. You have to pay for it now. Sorry, no one agreed to that. You can't just do it. And there is long-standing recognized law saying you can't just change the contract when you find out you're being sued. Well, according to Cernovich, the judge agreed. Patreon cannot change its terms, so no, it didn't backfire. It's working exactly as planned. Between Milo, Lauren Southern, and Sargon of Akkad, every single one of these people who closed their account could file an arbitration the same way that Owen Benjamin's fans did, and we would be seeing thousands of these claims. Take a look at what Cernovich said. 100 plus claims and upfront fees of up to $10,000 per arbitration. Up to $10,000 per arbitration. Increase that 100 plus to, 10,000. How many people did Milo have? How many did Lauren have? How many did Sargon have? I know for a fact that a decent amount of the people who were subscribed to me on Patreon left after Dave Rubin left, after Sargon left. And that means those terms don't apply to you. The old terms do, which means if you filed an arbitration claim in the similar vein as today did, it stands to reason Patreon's got to front the costs. And it's going to bankrupt them. As Cernovich says, that's it. That would be the end of Patreon. To make matters worse, you know what I think would actually happen? When it comes to payment processing on Patreon, Patreon actually takes in the money, holds it, and then dishes it out. I would be willing to bet that because Patreon has that money, they would take the money from other creators to cover the costs. Otherwise, they disappear. They cease to exist. So what would they do? It's the inherent risk of going through a company like Patreon, and it's why I don't. Now, there's other services that are similar, and they have similar problems, but this is a problem of Patreon specifically. There was a big story not too long ago about an MC and a multi-channel network. The way it works, multi-channel networks on YouTube, is that your ad revenue will go to the network, and then the network will pay you. When this one network went out of business, it took all of the money it had with it, even though it was the ad revenue that belonged to the creators. Putting the intermediary in the middle meant that the money first went to this company who dissolves and took the money with it, leaving the creators high and dry. Here's my prediction. If every single one of Sargon's patrons, Lauren's, Milo's, and anyone in between, anybody who is using, if they all file arbitration claims, Patreon's going to say, here's how much money we have right now even though they're supposed to pay it out. And they'll say, okay, we can cover the costs. And then what? What happens to all the money lost by these big creators? Now, I'm just saying that's my opinion. Maybe what happens is that Patreon caves, pays out whatever little bit is left, shuts the company down because they can't afford the costs of arbitration. This may be one of the most important battles we thought was over. Patreon had bent the knee to the outrage mob, and now they will get woke and go broke. They got woke some time ago. And now it would seem they're about to get broke so bad. This is going to be insane. I kid you not. Patreon's lawyers were telling the judge, listen, if you agree with them and side with them, we will have to front millions of dollars. And he was like, and these are your terms. The axe has been dropped. That's it. That would be the end of Patreon. Now, to those that use Patreon, man, look, I warned everybody. I said, you need to get off. You need to get off because it's not just about them banning you. It's about their legal responsibilities. What happens if Patreon goes belly up? It's too late. Have you gotten... I'm sorry, man. You were warned. Stay away from these culture wars, man. I think Patreon's going to collapse. Unless they can pull in some massive venture capital to cover the cost of all this arbitration. This is going to be nuts. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up tomorrow at 10 a.m. and I will see you all then.